What is the Bible? How did the Bible come into existence? Understanding the answer to these questions are more important than any other topic that we could discuss here at this channel. The Book of Enoch, angels, and all the intriguing supernatural aspects of the Bible mean nothing unless we understand this first. They are foundational and direct to every thought or understanding that we have about Jesus and the Bibles that we have on our shelves. If we don't answer these questions accurately, we will be lost to our own interpretations of truth. The Bible has captivated millions for well over 2,000 years. There's no other book like it. But unfortunately, many Christians like myself were initially deceived about what the Bible actually is. As a Christian, my only relation to the text is through our King Jesus. Jesus directly identified himself with the unified narrative of the Hebrew Bible. As always, it's important for us to start at the beginning. We've got so much fascinating material to discover together. Stay tuned, my friends. The beginning is near.
There's this crazy story at the beginning of the Bible. We have Adam and Eve, and they're in the Garden of Eden.
And everything in this garden is great. It's exactly as it should be, except there's this one tree that they're told by God not to eat from because it's dangerous and it will kill them.
So that's it. Avoid this fruit tree and we're fine.
Right, it seems pretty simple. But in this garden, there's a snake, and it starts telling a different story. It says that if you eat of this tree, it's not going to kill you. In fact, it's going to make you become like God.
And Adam and Eve, they believe the snake and they eat the fruit.
And because of this, the goodness of the garden is tragically lost, and evil and death enters into God's good world.
Now, why is there a talking snake in the garden? I mean, this thing is a problem.
Yeah, it's very strange. And even more strange is the fact that the Bible doesn't say why or how this thing even got there. It just presents the snake as this creature who's in rebellion against God and that wants to get other people to doubt God's goodness and lead them on a path towards death. And so whatever this snake is, it's the source of evil that pervades our world and our lives, even still today.
But there is some hope, because right here in the story, God makes this really interesting promise to Adam and Eve.
That someone is going to come in the future, a son of Eve. And this guy's going to come and he's going to crush the serpent's head and destroy evil at its source. However, during this battle, the serpent is going to bite this guy's heel.
So it's like a mutual destruction.
Yeah, it's this very strange but beautiful promise. And it's just left hanging there until the next key moment in the story.
And here the story of the Bible takes an important turn. We zoom into the story of a man and a woman who come out of Babylon, Abraham and Sarah.
Yeah, God promises that from them will come a new people, a nation that has another chance to make the right choice. And if they succeed, it will open up this new way forward for the rest of humanity.
And this is why the rest of the Bible story is about this family.
And it does not go well. Despite God's personal guidance, Abraham's family gives in to that same temptation to redefine good and evil on their own terms, apart from God.
Even when their best people were in charge, rulers who loved God's guidance and had divine wisdom, even they gave in.
And so Israel was warned by their own prophets that these choices would lead them back to Babylon, this time as conquered captives living in exile, and that's exactly what happened.
So even with God's personal guidance, Israel fails. Who can succeed?
Well, the prophet said that the story wasn't over. God's going to send a new leader to Israel to cover for their failures and to transform the people's hearts and minds so that they can make the right choice.
But the Old Testament ends, and the snake-crushing king that everyone's been talking about never shows up. And so I'm here with Tim Mackey. Hey, Tim.
Hey there.
And Carissa Quinn.
Hey, John.
Is joining us. Carissa, you weren't in the first two conversations. The first conversation we just talked about what is a paradigm and what are three kind of unhelpful paradigms that have good intuitions, but ultimately kind of leave the Bible flatter than it should be.
Or I'm trying to make it do things that it wasn't quite designed to do in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then in the second episode, we talked about the first attribute of the paradigm. We've broken down the paradigm into 7 attributes.
Yeah, or aspects.
Or aspects or
axioms, whatever.
yeah, whatever word we want to use.
Yeah.
The first one is that it is both human and divine. That was a great conversation about God using humans and the Bible not being made in spite of humans, but in collaboration with humans.
Importantly and necessarily through humans. Very intelligent ones, too.
Yeah.
The biblical
Yes.
authors, I mean, like highly intelligent human beings.
It starts with recognizing something about the Bible, a quality that it has, which is the word authority. You might use lots of other words. There are plenty of words we can use to describe what the Bible is. But it has authority. And here's the thing about authority. When we recognize authority, our job is to submit to it. That's what authority is all about. We submit to it. And as we submit to the Bible's authority, that can move us along to become faithful interpreters. And we show that submission to its authority by holding ourselves accountable. We want to be accountable as we come to the text and try to understand it better. Now, how do we think about this accountability? Well, we're accountable to the truth claims. We believe the Bible is true. Again, whatever words you use to describe that, the Bible is true, and therefore it has truth claims to make. And that's what we're accountable to as we submit to its authority. And we understand then that those claims are communicated by human instruments that God has chosen. You know, God could have done revelation dozens of different ways, I imagine, but he chose to use human instruments. And therefore, these human instruments have conveyed God's message to us. Okay, so God worked through that doorway, through that portal, those human instruments, to get the message to us. That means if we're going to get the message, what do we have to do? Go back through that. Our way to get to God's message is to go through those human instruments that he chose. Therefore, if we want to be accountable to God's authority in Scripture, we have to be accountable to those human instruments, because God's message is invested in those human instruments. So we want to know what their purposes were, what their intentions were. And we don't do that by psychoanalyzing them. It's not an issue of, kind of what did you think of your mother and what did you have for breakfast. We're not trying to get into their heads. We're trying to delve into their literature because they have communicated, and we believe that they've communicated effectively. So we then approach God's authority and God's message by trying to understand as best we can the message of the authors. Now, I include in that the compilers and things of that sort, but I'll just call them the authors, the human instruments.
There's a very underlying basic question. What is the Bible? And I wrestle with this all the time. Think about it, study through it. And I think it's at the core. This question sometimes gets overlooked, and then we just skip forward to looking at certain texts and things. And I wanted to just camp here for one quick second. I truly believe the answer to this question is at the heart of most modern evangelicals' misunderstanding for what the book of Job is, and ultimately what the Hebrew Scriptures are. Because when we say the Bible, we're talking about the Hebrew Scriptures right now. When Jesus said what the Bible and Paul quoted the Scriptures, they're talking about the Hebrew Bible. Right now we're going to talk about that. So personally, we enter into the story through Jesus. So we allow Jesus and his word to be the compass for how I interpret truth and the overall meaning of the Hebrew Scriptures. I wouldn't even be connected with this book if it weren't for him. But like the Bible Project says, the Bible is a unified story that leads to Jesus, But Eric, this isn't to say that we import Jesus personally into every single passage of the Old Testament. But what it does mean is that the Hebrew Scriptures at their very core and design were made to point towards the future revelation of a Messiah. This messianic hope and expectation is littered throughout the entirety of the Hebrew Scriptures. So I have a clip prepared, but first, with that in mind, Eric, how would you answer the question, what is the Bible?
Yeah, what a great question, and what a tough question to answer, right? This is not an adequate answer, but two things. First, you could say something like it's a divinely inspired prophetic narrative about God, creation, humanity, and redemption. Something like that is adequate. But I'd want to say something more. I don't want us to have Enlightenment modernistic sort of hermeneutical assumptions where you have the fully formed reader receiving information from the outside and sort of filtering it in and gradually changing. I want to say rather, instead of me reading the Bible and treating the text like an object, the Bible is a kind of world that is inviting me into it and re-narrating me.
Yeah.
So that everything looks different. If that at all makes sense, what's special and magical and wonderful about the Bible, I just so want to stay away from isolated objective reader receiving information, and much more God's story of redemption, and then we find we have a place in that story. Now, that's more how the Bible engages with us, but I hope it gets to a little bit more of what the Bible is. Tell me what you think, Jason.
No, I love that, and I mean, I agree with like what that's it's not just to enter into theological and whatever linguistic debates, but it's something that shapes who we are as humans. But where I'm going with this in my studies and understanding is it's like this. So I have a boat. I've got a little paddle oar in the back of it for if the engine fails, we can, paddle out of there. But my son, when we go to the beach, he takes the paddle out of the back of the boat and he uses it as a shovel, right? And, he doesn't know that it's, whatever, it's a paddle, he's using it as a shovel. And you can take this one thing and you can use it for multiple things, but what it's made for is to be a paddle. And I feel like the Hebrew Bible is that so often we can come to it and we're taking this paddle and we're using it as a shovel when it's like, hey, I'm a paddle. And, that to that point, with all that said, the book of Job is not an isolated work within the Hebrew narrative or messianic hope, because this is what I believe the Bible is. The Hebrew Bible is pointing us towards our need. We always have a saying here at the channel that the beginning is near. And that's to point us to the fact that as we're reading through the Hebrew Scriptures and the entirety of the Bible, that we're always supposed to be pointed back to the beginning in Genesis, in that garden moment. There's a lot of hyperlinks, as Tim says, or just connecting points that bring us back there. But what that's to say is that there's something that was laid out in Genesis that traces through the entirety of the narrative, that points us to our need of representative, of a hope, that later would be called this Messiah, this anointed one. And that's what, like, this was revolutionary for me, is that I never looked at the book of Job like that. So right now I got a clip that we'll watch from Tim Mackey, and then we'll discuss what the Bible is. Is it the oar or is it the shovel? We'll look at it together. How's it sound?
And in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, Jesus summarizes the entirety of the Hebrew Bible up into one sentence. It's really remarkable. I don't know if you've spent any time reflecting on it, but it's right here. Then he opened their minds so that they could understand the Scriptures, and he told them, this is what's written, and he's not quoting here, this is Jesus' summary. The Messiah will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and repentance for the forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. This is Jesus' summary of the message of the Old Testament. And the Old Testament includes the book of Job, doesn't it? This is Jesus' summary of the book of Job. 3 steps. It's really simple. The Messiah, God's chosen, favored one. You with me? That's step 1 of Jesus' summary. The Messiah enters into suffering and to death. But then out of death and through the other side, that Messiah is vindicated from suffering and death into resurrection life and into what Jesus says, forgiveness and good news announced to all of the nations. In Jesus' mind, it seems so simple. It's like, yeah, just read it. It's interesting. Job fits the pattern to a T. It begins with God's righteous, chosen, favored one, blessed, right? Are you with me? I mean, it's actually, remember, the book has a 3-part structure. A prologue, dialogues, and epilogue. The prologue is all about highlighting Job's righteousness and his innocence before God. And yet, this righteous one that God calls his servant is handed over to unjust suffering, near death, huge outcry of protest and lament. And after all of that lament is complete, God vindicates his righteous servant, restores his life, and restores him to a place of blessing, and forgives his friends, who, interestingly enough, are from all the surrounding nations. Anybody? Well, that's interesting. The book of Job is trying to shake us awake. The world's not okay. But man, what if, here outside of Eden, we had somebody who would stare down the worst of human pain and suffering and maintain their integrity and surrender their lives before God? Man, what if someone like that came along?
What if is the question, and that was a great clip, and I love how it makes the connection. That's what we were just talking about. So before I say another word, tell us what connections the book of Job has to the overall narrative of the Hebrew Bible, and respond to that clip.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great clip. Sorry, I just forgot that preacher's name. Remind me.
Tim Mackey.
Tim Mackey. Sorry, like Tim Mackey, it's very hard for me not to see Jesus as the ultimate Job.
Yeah.
I think that the book of Job is a window into how God relates to his world and what his relationship is to evil and suffering. The Friends have a very clear theory of that, and the book of Job undermines that. And it shows a man who innocently suffers what he thinks is the unjustified wrath of God to destroy the accusations of the devil and prove that a real relationship with God is possible and glorify God. And as soon as I say that, who does that remind you of in the New Testament? Jesus actually suffers the wrath of God, being innocent, to destroy the accusations of the devil, prove and demonstrate and give a way for us to provide a way for us to have a relationship with God and glorify God. So in terms of the big picture, we read Job on its own in the Old Testament to learn how does God relate to his world and what is his relationship to suffering and evil.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we see that God really puts his money where his mouth is. And as he asks us to trust him, God is the one who suffers most in the redemption of the world, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
That it costs, God has more skin in the game than anyone else. And it costs God more to redeem the world than any other human being, even what Job went through.
Yeah.
That's kind of the trajectory.
No, I love it. And I think that it's a both and, because there's no doubt, like the final form of the Hebrew scriptures that we call the Tanakh were put together by what Alter calls these arrangers, or these final editors that compiled there's little stamps in between the books that lets us know that these, how these things were brought together. We have a good idea of when they came to their final form. And we know that the book of Job was written before it came into its final form. So my whole point is to say that, it has all those things that you're saying 100% I agree with, and it's trying to answer some of those deep theological questions that we all have and that come through. But as it's placed in this designed narrative and flow of the Hebrew scriptures, I think that they put it there as that stamp as well to show that. And that's why I said it's not an either or, it's a both and I think that's beautiful. So I don't want to cut you off. Anything else?
No, just that I completely agree with you, and it makes the Bible fascinating to read.
Yeah.
You used the word intertexts earlier, and the Bible does have that wonderful echoing effect. It's continually nudging you to read it in light of other passages in the Bible. And it creates this wonderful sort of multidimensional effect that's just great to read. And your analogy of a paddle as an oar or
Shovel.
Whatchamacallit. Sorry, it's late in the week. My brain's not ready. That's a great analogy. And, no one is saying that Genesis isn't historically true. But you need to keep asking, what is Genesis 1 trying to do? And what is it not trying to do?
So this is the next step,
Yep.
that it's unified literature.
Yeah, unified is a word used in our short tagline.
Yeah.
A unified story leads to Jesus. What do we mean by unified?
When I hear unified, I think of the word coherence. It's a coherent story. So there's one story, there's even maybe a narrative thread through that entire story. But that is really hard to fathom when we're talking about so many different authors over a long, long period
Over
of time.
1,000 years,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah. that's
Spanning
right.
continents.
Yep, that's right. So we did craft a sentence to try and summarize
Oh,
this
yes.
Oh, good.
here. Here's the sentence that we crafted. The Bible has many authors, many literary styles, and many themes, but it is telling one story about God's rescue of humanity to be his partners in ruling the world. So there's kind of two implications there, that it's a diverse collection with lots of manys, many different authors, many different books and scrolls. Each scroll contains a variety of literary styles and topics or themes.
And by literary styles, you mean?
Poetry, narrative, discourse, proverbs,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So that's emphasizing that it's a collection that's diverse, but it has been unified in a couple important ways. One is what you could say is an editorial or compositional unity. In the same way that an author could bring to create an anthology. Authors often do this,
Yeah.
especially in different fields, like a professor of philosophy will collect some of the key essays of important philosophers throughout history and then bring them together, selections, and then write introductions and conclusions and essays that bring it all together. It's anthology. So that's a diverse work with diverse authors and origins, but that's been brought together under one unified whole.
And what's interesting about that example is that all the literary styles are going to be very similar. They're all just like philosophical, like didactic, probably kind of discussions.
Yeah.
And what makes the Bible even more interesting is not only is it an anthology of sorts, but it's such an eclectic anthology, which makes it feel more like an art project,
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah, so maybe the coherence is a little bit harder for us to identify because we're not really used to seeing that kind of an anthology.
Okay, so I think there's two ways to talk about the unity of the Bible. One is this anthological, there's the editorial, anthological unity to it.
Okay.
On one level, and we can talk about that. But then it's also unified in terms of its content, that there is a governing narrative
Yes.
From beginning to end that isn't like an organizing principle.
And that's where, like, if you went to some sort of art show that had an overall, like, theme,
Yeah, that's right.
but there's projections on the wall and there's paintings and there's someone doing spoken word. And so it's like feels very eclectic, but there's like a common motif and ideas that are recurring. So when you're done, there is a sense of coherence. The Bible kind of does that as well.
Yeah.
When we say the Bible's unified literature, what we're taking for granted is that it is an eclectic anthology.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't maybe realize that when they open the Bible,
Yeah.
that they're actually coming to a library of many different scrolls written in different literary styles by different authors.
Yeah, so maybe let's start there. Let's make that a marker post right now. So let's just say you open a Bible and you look at the table of contents, you'll see there's two major collections in a Christian Bible, Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox Bible. There's two main sections, one called the Old Testament, that we call usually the Hebrew Bible in our conversations, and then the New Testament. And it's helpful to understand the unity of the Bible. It's helpful, in my mind, to separate those two collections because they each have a unique formation history that is a little bit different.
Yes.
So it's helpful, in my mind, to separate them out and to talk a little bit about the editorial unity and history of the Hebrew Bible.
One Bible, two collections.
One Bible, two collections, each with a different formation history, but one governing narrative that spans both collections.
We need your help. Ring Them Bells is a nonprofit organization where every dollar donated goes right back into the mission of spreading the good news and helping those in need. The main ministry of Ring Them Bells is serving those in need in the name of our King Jesus. Over the past year, we have fed over 2,000 meals, and next year, we want to double that. We can't do this without your support. Everything we create here and all of the food that we serve is free because it's paid for by generous viewers just like you. If you feel led to donate and join the mission with us here at Ring Them Bells, click the Give Butter link in the notes and comments of this video. If you can't support us financially, please continue to like and share the content, as this helps us so much with spreading the good news about what Jesus has done for our world.
And biblical literature, as an example, has a different kind of authorial history than how we imagine it today. It's traditional literature. It's community traditional literature, which doesn't mean it was written by anybody and everybody, but it was literature that was studied, edited, compiled, reshaped over the course of many generations. And that's a part of its origins that's, I think, different than how we think of books today.
So I'm trying to think about what this means for readers as we approach the Bible as a unified story.
Yeah.
The fact that there's this earlier collection that is studied and maybe edited or redacted into the overall storyline, but then there are these later works. At least one thing that makes me think of is that as we read the later works, so like the prophets and the writings, that we should be looking for how they're reflecting on the Torah, the earlier parts. They've studied them and they're weaving together those themes. So reading the Bible as a unified story, it'll look for developments from the Torah through the prophets, through the writings.
Yeah, that's right. There was a big wave of Hebrew Bible scholarship that was trying to reverse engineer the collection of the Hebrew Bible to break it back into its previous parts and stages. And
with the earliest being the most authentic.
In theory.
Yeah, in theory. And
That's
so
right.
this is important to talk about because we're saying that these are different layers, but they actually form one unified story, which is a specific way of viewing the text of the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah, and to combine it with our conversation last time about human and divine and the word inspiration, meaning people guided by the Spirit, what some traditions of Christianity have tended to do is to limit the God-breathed nature of these documents to the activity of the handful of people named. Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah.
And not the guy who wrote the last paragraph.
And when you limit it to the named people, we're ignoring the historical reality that it was generations of prophets and scribes and disciples of Isaiah that are talked about in the book of Isaiah as the people who inherited the first version of the book of Isaiah. Or Baruch, who's mentioned in Jeremiah as the author of the scroll of Jeremiah. Not Jeremiah himself, but a guy named Baruch, who's mentioned in the book. So we have to, I think, adjust our view of inspiration to the way it's actually talked about in the Bible itself, which is that it's a community of prophets and people who saw themselves as part of the composition history of this collection. But again, if we could just go interview your average Jew in the Second Temple period, they didn't ever see it in one volume the way we do, and they wouldn't have conceived of it as a book. The Tanakh, as we encounter it, the whole collection is spun out of the first few literary units of the Genesis scroll. So the creation and the Eden stories, and the stories of the flood and the scattering of Babylon and the choosing of Abraham, that sequence right there sets the vocabulary, literary themes that are just going to be on recycle. And every scroll in the Tanakh collection is riffing off of stuff going on in those early chapters.
And what are those themes?
Yeah, God is the great creator and provider
Giver
of
life.
Order and life. He's installed humanity as an image through whom to rule the world and to steward its fruitfulness. Humans do a really poor job.
Violence and...
Yeah, we take God's gifts and we use them to aggrandize ourselves and our agendas, and a lot of people get hurt in the process. So out of the decreation, he saves a remnant, chooses a remnant, and gives them a chance of becoming humanity 2.0. And that happens with Noah, and then with Abraham, and then with Isaac, and then with Jacob, and then so on.
This is the cycle of God creating, establishing a human, and at first all humanity, but then picking humans, like, okay, let's try again. Failing, some sort of decreation, and then selecting then a human again.
It's like a melody.
It's like a melody that's repeating. It's very clear in Genesis, and that just continues on through the whole Hebrew Bible.
It's what all the Torah and the prophets are about. And the Babylonian exile is portrayed as the ultimate catastrophic flood that happened to the chosen people of the family of Abraham. A remnant returned, and
the
Hebrew Bible comes from that remnant, which has taken the whole collection and oriented it around a future hope about God raising up someone from among the remnant who will do for Israel and for the world what none of us seem to be able to do for ourselves. The seed of the woman, the snake crusher, the Messiah. And so that's where the Hebrew Bible is organized in terms of content and theme about the hope for a future human who will reverse the failure at Eden and reverse Israel's failure and release God's blessing to all of the world. Every book in the Tanakh
is about that.
About that in some way. If I can't see how it's about that, the problem is probably more to do with my assumptions. For many people, divergent details in accounts of the same event happen all over the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah.
And so if your assumption is, well, this is a historical record of the history of ancient Israel, those are going to be problems or contradictions. But a contradiction in a collection of texts is in the eye of the beholder. The fact that a recipe book, like you turn to one page and the recipe is really different than the recipe 20 pages later. Oh, it's a contradiction. Well, no, the contradiction is only in your assumptions that a recipe book should have all the same recipes. Like, that's a wrong assumption.
Yes.
So in the same way, if my assumptions about what the Bible is lead me to see contradictions in it, maybe my assumption is the problem, not the Bible. But the point is just saying, in a diverse collection, there's going to be diversity.
Yes.
And if I can see, oh, it was brought together in this particular way as an anthology, but has been given a unified shape in its final form. It's a collection that tolerates enormous diversity in terms of content and literary style, but it's unified in really clear and obvious ways if you have eyes to see it.
And this is why, when the New Testament begins, it introduces us to Jesus of Nazareth, not as some random guy, but as someone who comes to fulfill these specific ancient promises.
Yeah, we learn that he's from the line of David, Judah, and Abraham.
And he goes around Israel announcing that the goodness of God's kingdom is here now. And he begins confronting the effects of evil on people by healing them, by forgiving them of their sins and evil.
Many people are now believing that this is, in fact, the promised king.
But Jesus began telling his closest followers that he was going to become king and bring peace by taking the full effect of humanity's evil into himself.
The fatal snakebite wound.
Exactly. And so it seems like the serpent wins. And this story actually would be a tragedy except for what happens next. Jesus rises from the dead.
And now Jesus has the power over evil and death for himself.
And so the rest of the New Testament is then making this claim that Jesus' power over evil and death has now become available to us to begin confronting the effects of evil in our lives.
But even still, death and evil are a real problem in our world all around us.
And so the story of the Bible ends by describing this future day when Jesus comes back and he finishes the job. He destroys the snake once and for all, and he restores the goodness of the garden here on earth.
Stay tuned, subscribe, and press that bell so you can get the alerts and see all the important content that we have coming your way. We are just getting started here, and we have so much left to explore.